Good evening, everybody. As Emily mentioned, my name is Annsara Elasky, and I am in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office in the, we call it Adult Services Division or Mental Health Division. I've been in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office for approximately, 15 and a half years. And the first 8 of those years, I was in criminal divisions in juvenile prosecution and adult violent crimes. And for the past 7.5 years, I've been in the mental health division. And so hopefully I'm gonna be able to give you a little bit of information and hopefully answer some of those questions about people who come into the mental health, the civil commitment area in the presentation today. I'm happy to answer questions. You can put them in the chat and I can ask or answer them after the presentation. If there's something pressing, I don't know that I can see raised hands very easily in this format. But anyway, if you need to get something clarified, or I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions after the presentation.
One thing, there
yes.
are already 2 questions in the chat.
Okay.
So somebody came and approached me a couple of days ago.
Okay.
Yeah, this is for people who are very, very interested, this is a very, very important topic.
Okay, great. So today I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on kind of what civil commitment is and the criteria for the commitment process. And with that, I'm also going to discuss, since you guys do have questions specifically about kind of the incompetency proceedings and how that ties into commitment court, I'll discuss that as well. And then kind of what happens after commitment and what you as community members or even if you have any loved ones that are dealing with mental health issues, I have some suggestions and of course, any questions, we can go through that. But a little bit of background, civil commitment is a court order for treatment of a mental illness, a chemical dependency, or developmental disability. I'm going to focus today on mental illness mostly, and a little bit of chemical dependency. I'm not really going to discuss developmental disability, but our office, my division, and I specifically, we also handle a lot of cases for people who are committed as mentally ill and dangerous, as well as sexually dangerous persons and sexual psychopathic personalities. And if you do have any questions about those types of cases, I'm happy to discuss those as well, because I handle those cases. So kind of the basics of the commitment criteria for mental illness. Mental illness does not necessarily mean someone who has to be schizophrenic or has to be bipolar. The mental illness definition is really someone who cannot care for themselves and who has any type of behavior, any type of issue that it doesn't have to be one of those specified mental illnesses. It could be unspecified psychosis. It could be a variety of different diagnoses that go into a mental illness. So it's a little bit different. The court version definition of mental illness is a little bit different than what a lot of people think is like a severe and persistent mental illness. For chemical dependency, it's the excessive and habitual use of drugs or alcohol, and usually that has to be proven through a variety of UTOC screens, or they've gone to the hospital multiple times and gotten blood draws, or their blood alcohol content has been so high for many, many times, because we do have to prove that it's not only excessive, we also have to prove that it's habitual use of those drugs or alcohol. And then not only do you have to suffer from that ailment, you also there has to be a likelihood of harm. And that harm is where you're either a danger to yourself or to others. And that could include failing to provide food, clothing, shelter. It could be a recent attempt to discuss, or sorry, Sandra's just saying, sorry to interrupt. Sandra, did you need to chime in? I will be explaining what commitment actually is. So the commitment, excuse me, back to the failure. So the harm is what something what someone fails to do. So it's not only someone who would go out and kind of get in a fight with someone, or it's not just someone who like walks down this middle of the street naked in the middle of winter where they're a danger to their harm to themselves. It could be any type of harm similar to that. But a lot of times people think just because someone is mentally ill and they're living on the streets that they would meet the criteria for civil commitment, and that is not necessarily the case. They really do have to be a danger to themselves or to others. And then for chemical dependency, they have to have serious physical problems. And we also have to look at what the least restrictive way to treatment is. So if someone is in the community who is mentally ill, but they have a case manager, they're taking their medications, they may still come across and have a public urination or something like that to bring them to law enforcement's attention. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to come into civil commitment, because there are less restrictive ways that we can treat this person through their case managers, through different social service agencies potentially. But civil commitment this is the basic elements of a civil commitment. And what civil commitment is, to answer Sandra's question, is the court order for treatment. It doesn't, I am an attorney, the judges that I work with are attorneys. We do not order any type of treatment. We are not medical professionals. It is just civil commitment is the court order for someone to have to undergo treatment. And there is no requirement for age. Juveniles tend not to be civilly committed very often because parents can consent to treatment. And so the only juveniles that we really come across are juveniles whose parents are maybe in denial, or maybe they just don't want their child to be treated with a certain type of medication. However, if they do end up in a hospital and the hospital believes that they are truly a danger to themselves or others, the hospitals can petition for a child to be civilly committed so that they can receive those medications or whatever treatment that the hospital deems that they need. So these are kind of the basics in the commitment process. So the first step is a hold. Someone is in the community, they're not doing well, and in fact, they are doing something that could be a danger to themselves or others. They usually go to a hospital type setting. 99.9% of the cases that we deal with, and in Hennepin County, we have approximately 1,500 to 1,800 cases a year. But those petitions that we get are initiated by a facility, HCMC, Abbott, Methodist, whatever entity needs to hold on to a patient. However, the police, of course, can put someone on a law enforcement hold, and I'll discuss that a little bit more, but they just need to get a person into the hospital to get evaluated. Once they're in the hospital to get evaluated, then we they petition for someone to be committed. There's a pre-petition screening is an agency of the district court, or excuse me, of Hennepin County, that kind of is the gatekeeper for a lot of these types of petitions, and they give us our work. I'll explain that a little bit more. Then there are court hearings, and then it's the court order that is the civil commitment order that they have to follow. They're no longer a voluntary patient. So in terms of the holds, you might come across some law enforcement officers that you work with or that you see in the second precinct that put people on holds. And it's basically to get a person who is in crisis out of the community and to a hospital setting. And so those can be issued by a variety of different types of professionals, social workers, law enforcement, and they can take information from people if it's reliable information and they deem the person who's giving the information to be credible. and they can use that information to write their hold. So if you, for example, come across someone who's in the community who is not doing very well, and you observe that person weaving in and out of traffic, running across the street against the lights, doing something dangerous, but when the police officer gets there, they're fine, and they are not observing any of that dangerous behavior, the police officer can take your word for it if they deem that you are reliable enough, and still write a hold. So that's important information that a lot of people don't know about. And we've done trainings with all of Minneapolis Police Department personnel, well, at least I think all the street cops, and I think all the sergeants as well. We did a couple of years ago, we did a variety of crisis intervention trainings with the department, and the police officers should know that they can take information from other people to write their holds. Once police officer is able to get the person to an emergency room, then the hospital or the facility would put them on what they call a 72-hour hold. And that has to be decided by an examiner at the hospital, a doctor, an APRN, a mental health practitioner that works at the hospital. And they are the ones who then go and petition for civil commitment. So if someone is at the hospital, they want to leave. They say, I'm fine, I don't know what you're talking about, and they're actively psychotic, they're actively hallucinating, they're delusional, or they're so intoxicated that they can't form any sentences properly other than that they want to leave, something like that. The hospital has to make the decision as to whether or not they want to put that person on a hold. And if they do, they basically have to go from the hospital into the court process within that 72 hours. So it's a pretty quick turnaround that the hospital has to decide whether or not they want to petition for someone's civil commitment. The hospitals can take information from loved ones, from social workers, from whomever in the community, the police officers that can give information about the person's behavior. And that is actually really helpful for the social workers to get that type of information so they can pass it on to the doctors. Because if someone is in the hospital and all of a sudden, they decide that they're fine, they're gonna mind their P's and Q's, or whatever hallucination has gone away, they can present as being fine, and the hospital, the doctor wouldn't necessarily know anything different if they don't have a lot of background information. So I always tell family members if they have a loved one who is going into the hospital, to call the social worker, call the hospital, and just give them some background information as to why you're concerned about this particular person, and why you think that the hospital should hold on to the person rather than release the person prior to that 72-hour hold being up. And not everyone is on a 72-hour hold right away. A lot of people could be voluntary for a period of time, but the minute they say they want to leave, and if the hospital does not deem that they would be safe, then the hospital can put them on a hold at that time. And so in the hospital, in the petition, they do have to provide detailed information as to why commitment is appropriate. And a lot of that information can come from other sources. And so that is kind of the important part of, you as community members, what you can do to assist in giving that information to either the police officers who are putting the person on their law enforcement hold, or even contacting the social worker at the hospital. Excuse me. And then the petitioner has to contact Pre-Petition Screening. As I mentioned, this is an entity within Hennepin County Human Services. They look at medical records. They usually call and interview family members. They try and talk to the patient, and they put together a report that they then send on to my office. And that is when the county attorney is notified as to there's someone who needs to be looked at for potential civil commitment. That's kind of our gatekeepers to a certain extent, or the pre-petition screening program. But they too, they usually have to work under a pretty tight time frame. They have a really quick turnaround, but they can also inquire from law enforcement as to kind of what's going on. They don't often look up police reports. That's kind of more on my end, but if they do have any questions, they can look at that. So then once pre-petition, if they support a petition, that gets forwarded to my office, and we look at it, we kind of review the petition, we sign off on it, and we become the lawyer for the petitioner. So I am the lawyer for HCMC, for if it's a Hennepin County resident, but they're in Ramsey County and at Regions, I'm the petitioner, or I'm the lawyer for Regions Hospital. So it doesn't matter, I'm the lawyer for whoever's petitioning against to have this person remain in the hospital. The person, the patient, is then, we call them the respondent, a defendant in criminal court, respondent in mental health court, and they are appointed an attorney. And this attorney is their attorney for the duration, not only of this commitment, but for as long as they're in commitment court. Some of the defense attorneys have been on the panel since the late 80s, early 90s, and have had patients come through as, often, or every 10 years or whatever. But as long as that person has an attorney who's still on the defense panel, they will be appointed and reappointed as their defense attorney. So it's really nice, because then they have continuity of at least that in kind of the court process, so they can know their attorney. So we have what's called an examination by a court-appointed psychologist and a preliminary hearing once they actually get into court after our petition has been filed. And that's usually about 3 days after we file the petition. And once we have that preliminary hearing, that's usually just to determine whether or not the person should be held in the facility pending our trial. And the court can continue that hold, because the 72-hour hold is expired. So now they're on a court hold until our trial, which in Hennepin County, other counties do it different, but in Hennepin County, our trial is most often 3 days after the preliminary hearing. So this process moves very quickly. I was in criminal divisions for many years, which I felt like cases took forever. And coming over to this division, everything is usually wrapped up within 10 days, kind of at the longest, even if there's some holidays in there. But it really is because we want to have the person be able to be treated as quickly as possible. Because if they are refusing medications, or if they're really psychotic, a lot of times the hospitals do want those court orders in place to treat some of the people that are in their facilities. So now I'm going to kind of pivot and talk a little bit about Rule 20s, because I know you guys have had some discussion about Rule 20s and the due process, the Fifth Amendment due process issues that come up when there is a defendant, a criminal defendant who is incompetent to proceed. So it's governed by our Minnesota Rules of Criminal Procedure, Rule 20, and there's two different kind of subparts of Rule 20. 2001, which is the most common incompetency. There are two different parts of that, which are that no one can waive counsel in a competency proceeding. So that's part of the statute, that if you are subject to a competency, if there's some issue as to whether or not you can proceed, you have to be represented by counsel. And that the second part of it, that gets evaluated by psychologists in Hennepin County, is whether or not they're competent to participate in the proceedings, and mainly whether or not they can rationally consult with their counsel, or they can understand the proceedings or participate in the defense. So there's really the two prongs. And if any of those prongs are not met, if they can't consult with their counsel, if they can't understand their proceedings, or if they can't participate in their defense, that would be a due process violation if they were to be tried, if they were to have a hearing or anything that could give them criminal consequences. So they really do need to be competent in order to participate in their criminal proceedings. And then the other part of Rule 20 is a 2002, and maybe some of you have heard of Mcnaughton Defense. That's kind of what Minnesota adopts, and that's because of mental illness or cognitive impairment, the defendant. So at the time that they're committing the act, they were laboring under such a defect. This is actually, Mcnaughton, I believe, is a late 1800s, like an 1898 case, going back to way back in law school when I learned about it, sorry. But basically they're laboring under such a defect of reason as not to know the nature of the act that it was wrong. And so that's kind of what we call our defensive mental illness. So sometimes there are defenses, self-defense or defense of others. Those are some of the other defenses that you have, or just a not guilty defense. This is another type of defense that a defense attorney would have to bring up at the onset of a proceeding, and then it would be analyzed by the psychologist to determine, kind of what was the state of mind when the crime was being committed. And so those are Rule 20 cases. So when someone is deemed incompetent, either under Rule 20 or Rule 2002, Rule 2001 or 2002, they come over to commitment court if they are deemed incompetent. Kind of different ways, nuanced, but not as important. The nuance isn't as important as it is that they do get referred by the criminal judge over to my division. And in my division, we review kind of the situation, we review the psychologist's report, we review the police reports, and we have to look at that same commitment criteria, whether or not they suffer from a mental illness or chemical dependency, and whether or not they're a danger to themselves or others. And so a lot of times, we call them gap cases, where someone, could be mentally ill, but at the same time, they're not a danger to themselves or others. They're coming through because they have, a pile of trespasses, a pile of misdemeanor charges, a pile of public urination, just all of those livability crimes that unfortunately don't rise to the level that I would need for them to be a danger to themselves or others under the statute. And in Rule 20 cases, misdemeanors are automatically dismissed. So that is why you could have someone who has been through the process many, many times, racking up the same types of charges, and they're never being convicted of them, because if they are incompetent, misdemeanor charges are automatically dismissed once they're found incompetent. Gross misdemeanors and felonies are suspended, and they get reviewed at a later date, generally every 6 months. So a person once they go through their criminal process, they're deemed incompetent, there would be kind of a 6-month date for them to return again to have their competency evaluated by one of the psychologists. And they could potentially attain competency if they, are not using substances, something like that, that could help them attain competency. For those people who do meet the criteria for civil commitment, if they are in jail, they are supposed to be, unfortunately, this has not been happening, especially now due to COVID, but they're supposed to be committed. Once they're committed to the Commissioner of Corrections, the Commissioner of Corrections is supposed to get them out of jail within 48 hours. Unfortunately, like today, for example, I had a case and the person is sitting in jail and he's going to get committed again, but the commissioner already said that there's 10 people on the waiting list before this person who's also in jail. They just don't have the bed space. But so it's been a little bit challenging. If a person is out of custody and they are committed. Usually it's to get them some types of services such as case management, and I'll discuss kind of, what happens after commitment a little bit later. But those are some of the things that the Rule 20 people can go to, or they can, the services that they can receive. Unfortunately, the gap cases it's a pretty large pot of people that end up in the gap cases because they just don't necessarily meet the criteria for someone who would be civilly committed. So I can, if there are questions about that, I can explain more, but those are kind of the Rule 20 cases. So what happens in court, like I said, we have the examination, the preliminary hearing, and then we have a trial 3 days after that preliminary hearing. And in the trial, it could settle prior to trial with what we call a stay of commitment. And I would say 70% of our cases, we resolve it in a stay of commitment. And it's kind of an agreement between the patient and our office saying like, hey, I'm gonna, abstain from using substances. I'm going to agree to take the medications as prescribed. I'm going to do whatever the case manager wants me to do in terms of, staying out of trouble and staying in contact with case management. I'm going to go to whatever facility the hospital wants me to go to after I'm discharged from the hospital. So the stays are kind of the majority of what we deal with, that kind of contract agreement between the patient and our office. But at a trial, the judge only has the option to either commit someone or to dismiss the case. They don't have the ability to put someone on a stay, for example. And as I mentioned, things move very quickly in Hennepin, and the average case is about 2 weeks, maybe, between the first petition or the first getting into the hospital and to when the court issues a decision. The court always takes them under advisement. They don't rule from the bench. I think back, I don't know how many years ago, they used to, I think, rule from the bench. However, they do have a lot of, like, the exhibits that I put in are a lot of medical records, so they have to go over those. But also, before COVID and before remote hearings, the respondent was in the courtroom with with everybody, and they could potentially get agitated. And I think a few of them actually did. And the deputies were the ones who had to transport them from the jail, or excuse me, from the hospital to the courthouse and back to the hospital. And a lot of times they were having some difficulties with that. So the court generally always takes these under advisement and usually issues the order within, 3-4 days. But the court order details the agreements of the settlement, the stay, or they commit to the requested entities. And in Hennepin County and a lot of places, we commit not only to the Commissioner of Human Services, we commit to whatever facility the person is at. So say, for example, Abbott, and that gives Abbott the ability to kind of determine more treatment options for the patient. And so ultimately, commitment is an order for 6 months. It doesn't mean that the person's going to be in the hospital for 6 months, but that is how long the court order is good for. It can be extended through subsequent hearings, but commitment is really just for an acute kind of moment in time when we want to get the person back, to taking their medications, doing whatever we can to help them get under control. And so the court order designates which entities control the treatment. So as I mentioned, it could be Abbott, it could be Methodist, could be HCMC, wherever that person is, as well as the Commissioner of Human Services. And they do often do more than one place. As I mentioned, the patient's no longer voluntary. They have to they are subject to the court's orders for commitment, so they cannot all leave wherever they are without some kind of consequence. We're not criminal, so we can't just put someone in jail if they are not abiding by the court orders. We can revoke a provisional discharge if they're on it, or we can kind of pick them up, have the sheriff pick them up and take them back to a hospital, but we don't order people to jail. We don't have that authority. And the commitment entity has the authority to determine the treatment. As mentioned, we're attorneys, we are not medical professionals, so we don't even try to get involved in what the person might be needing. And the court does not say what the conditions that a person has to be treated under. So most of the patients are treated in community hospitals or privately run chemical dependency programs, but there are some state-run hospitals, and they unfortunately have very few beds. The largest one kind of that people know about maybe is Anoka Metro Regional Treatment Center. There's a state-run hospital, the Minnesota Security Hospital down in St. Peter. That is for patients who are mentally ill and dangerous. They now actually call it the Forensic Mental Health Program. So you might hear either MSH or FMPH, or that acronym for the MIND patients. There is the community behavioral health hospitals, the CABs, they call them, or the CARE programs, which are the community and recovery enterprises. Those are the programs for the chemical dependency patients. So those are some of the state-run programs. There is, like, for example, the juvenile program that they had for many years only had 3 beds for the whole state. So unfortunately, you kind of have to be a little bit creative with a lot of patients. I think even in the CARE programs, I haven't heard a recent update, but I think there was maybe 70 beds for the state. And Hennepin could fill up most of these on a almost daily basis, unfortunately. But and that's for the whole state. So we do try to work with our state partners and Department of Human Services, but really the majority of people are treated at community hospitals. And then in terms of medications, this is kind of a major part for the mental illness piece, because a lot of people do respond really well to antipsychotic medications if they can get stabilized on them. So I always tell loved ones, especially if they know that if their loved one is no longer taking their medications, to make sure that they tell that to the social worker at the hospital if they're on a hold, or and just what types of medications they are taking. Some of the antipsychotic medications, example, are Risperdal, Haldol, Zyprexa, Latuda. Those are some of the neuroleptic medications that really can help stabilize patients, and that hospitals sometimes have to file a separate petition, which we call a Jarvis petition. We request a Jarvis order so that the hospital can treat a patient against their will, usually through an injection, if they're refusing to take their medications. And these are usually filed at the same time as our commitment petitions. And so after leaving the hospital, once the commitment process is done, the patient is assigned a county case manager. It's not just a Hennepin County case manager, but it's monitored through case management services. I think we contract with, I don't know, maybe 10 different agencies for case management services. You might have heard of Vivo or ResCare. We contract with a lot of different case management agencies, and they really do try to do what's the best fit for the client. If it's someone who needs a little bit more supervision, they might do an ACT team, an assertive community treatment team, that sees the patient a couple times a week, versus sometimes, if someone doesn't need it quite as much supervision and can get by with just like one time a month or in person or one time plus a phone call a month. And it just kind of depends on the level of case management services. And I always tell police officers when they are talking to someone who might be in crisis to ask them if they can answer whether or not they have a case manager, and to contact that case manager just to kind of see, what a person's baseline might be, whether or not a person, should go to a certain hospital. But the case managers usually have a lot of knowledge about people that they work with in the community. And so the case manager is assigned, and they can be put on what's called a provisional discharge. So once they leave the hospital to go wherever they might be going, whether it be home, whether it be to inpatient facility somewhere, whether it be whatever services they get set up in place, the case manager monitors that for the court, and they help. They're a support system for that person who might be or who is under commitment or on a stay of commitment. Case managers are also assigned for people who are on stays of commitment. And then the case manager is the one who reports back to court if the commitment needs to be extended for any period of time. And like I said, that would require more hearings, but the case manager is the one who monitors that. So, and then some of my final takeaway suggestions for commitment and trying to help people in the community, trying to help any loved ones, just collect as much information as you can under the circumstances, and pass that along to the police officers that you might be that might be in the situation, pass it along to social workers at the hospital, pass it along to the case managers. A lot of times they can't necessarily discuss the person with you if they don't have a release of information. But they can take as much information about the person, the situation, as you're willing to give them. So I do often tell loved ones, just kind of keep a log of behaviors, keep a log of concerns, keep a log of, if you know that they're not taking medications, if whatever you can, more information isn't going to hurt. And then just make sure that the information you have is specific about the behaviors. This is for a hold. If you are trying to get someone on a hold, if the police officer is trying to get someone on a hold, and then just document your observations. So that is kind of civil commitment basics. So now I can take questions. I'm going to end my slideshow. And I am gonna stop sharing.
Do you see chat at the bottom of your screen?
I do see chat, but I don't see any questions in the chat.
You have to scroll up. You have to scroll the questions up. Click on chat, and it should appear on the. Okay, I will read it to you.
Sorry, there's nothing on the chat in my chat.
Okay. It says everybody can see my message as well.
Can other people see it?
Sometimes they lie. Okay, first question was, the first question is, they're just two so far. What legal resources are available for respondents to talk to an attorney when they are in a holding period while a petition for commitment is being reviewed? Can they talk to the attorney at that point?
They can. So the defense panel that I mentioned earlier, they are paid through the Hennepin County Board, and they are not assigned until after a petition has been filed. But that does not mean that a patient can't speak to someone. There are other attorneys in the area that do commitment case work. So they can absolutely talk to an attorney. It doesn't necessarily, it's not the same as like a criminal proceeding, for example, where the police officers give you a certain amount of time to contact a defense attorney, because the civil commitment process is a little bit longer than that period of time, if that makes sense. but they absolutely can contact a defense attorney. But like I said, once a petition is filed, they would be assigned a defense attorney.
I think the ASPR understood that. Okay. Is there a priority system for the county attorney's office to investigate referrals, for example? And I think you actually answered this, but let's point it up anyway. For example, are referrals by MPD given priority over requests made by an individual? And I think you did.
Yeah, so
I think you did answer that, really, except the connection isn't there.
Right. So for anyone in terms of like the cases that we get from the pre-petition screening program. So any hospital, any person who wants to go forward with a commitment really has to kind of go through that pre-petition screening program. And it is important, like one of the things that the petition has to have is an examiner statement. And that examiner statement has to be from a licensed professional, a medical doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. So it can't just be a concerned family member saying, I want you to screen this case. It really does have to go through a licensed professional before we would get the case.
But the family member can keep that incident diary and present that as evidence.
Absolutely. And I do, if you guys are familiar with COPE, Community Outreach for Psychiatric Emergencies, they are a really good resource for family members to contact if they are having any issues with some of their family members that might need services. And I always say, tell COPE some of that information, because then we always request COPE records if we know that COPE has been contacted. So that's a way to kind of open the door for someone to get help. And then obviously, yes, if they are hospitalized, contact the hospital and let them know kind of your concerns.
Okay, I'm getting the idea that it goes through COPE or MPD trained officer so that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and it's pro forma.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep. So. Okay, so Fran has a question. Has anyone from your office been involved in the planning and development of training for the non-police response that is being developed in Hennepin County? Are you talking specifically about the kind of the social workers that are working with some of the police departments, or? Sorry, you're muted.
Okay. Well, actually, thinking in terms of the fact that they have already been planning for either a totally non-police response or a joint response. So your information is really critical to how some of that is going to be handled. And so whoever is responding, and I know they're doing that now, right?
Yeah, there are co-responders in a lot of jurisdictions. I think MPD has kind of limited hours, like Brooklyn Park has a really developed co-responder program.
So in terms of the training that those people get, does that include the information, this excellent information that you just gave us?
Yep, so in some of the crisis intervention trainings that I mentioned that myself and a couple other colleagues have done, there have been, it's not just law enforcement that have been in some of those sessions, it has been probation officers, it has been social workers, it has been, there have been other kind of justice partners involved in some of those trainings. And some of my colleagues in my division have definitely been like kind of working with the police departments, especially for, the gap cases that I mentioned, and trying to come up with good solutions for people who are incompetent. What can we do when they don't meet criteria for civil commitment, and trying to come up with community-based solutions to help them attain competency and also get them connected with case management, it'd be of course voluntary, but just to have them have that opportunity for them to receive that information. So yeah, they're involved in those conversations.
It seems really important, and I was looking at the note about the misdemeanors being dismissed. So you have people who end up being extremely obnoxious and disruptive, but they aren't actually committing anything other than a misdemeanor. And so those are the people who are going to go round and round again and come through again. And I would think that they would be a large number of the people who, you know, it's sort of, you know, you start with them, or not you, but that process is started with them, and then they realize that they're not going to fit it. So then they're out on the street and they're doing the same thing. And so I guess part of what my question is has to do with what training other, and you've answered this, the crisis intervention and, you know, the boundaries of the civil commitment and that sort of thing. So thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I can see my colleague in the city attorney's office, Numdi's on this call, and he probably has to deal with quite a few of the nuisance cases. Me being in the county attorney's office, my office only handles felonies and some misdemeanors, but Numdi in the city attorney's office handles all of those misdemeanors, those misdemeanants.
Okay.
We do, and your presentation was excellent and spot on about a lot of the issues, these gap cases particularly. You know, it's a pretty, I would say it's a pretty big issue with people that continue to go around, but they're not a danger to themselves or others. So what do you do? And I know our office has try to work with policymakers to try and address some of these things. I think, did you talk about 1800 Chicago?
Not specifically, but
okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I can. It is the detox facility. I think they do call it something other than detox now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is the facility that handles chemically dependent patients. And a lot of times the hospitals use them kind of as a waiting area, waiting room, waiting place for people who are pending commitment, or even are on a stay of commitment for chemical dependency before they might go to an inpatient program. Yeah.
So, I mean, or go ahead.
No,
with that said, it's I would say that, you know, gap cases make up quite a bit of the people that I deal with, honestly. And there's not a criminal hammer that we can necessarily bring to people if they're found incompetent, but they're not committed necessarily. And I think you said that of the petitions that go through, 70% of them result in what are called stayed commitments.
Yeah, I think that's about right. And in terms of like, so I don't have our exact numbers for the last couple of years, but I want to say we were around like 15 to 1600 cases a year. Only about 175 of those are the Rule 20 cases that come to our office. So it's kind of a small number of cases that we deal with in terms of civil commitment, but there are quite a few cases that we just can't do much with, the Rule 20 cases, because they are those gap cases where they don't meet the criteria for civil commitment. We review them. We always take a look at them just to see, but yeah, a lot of them don't meet the criteria.
So I think I mean, after or going forward, I know that we you know, we don't have a really good answer for it right now, and we're just trying to figure out, because I mean, certainly a lot of neighborhoods are upset by people that they continue to see and know. But I mean, your explanation for just the process of them, a petition being filed and actually being committed is a process.
Mm-hmm. And we do have a court intake social worker. Her name is Nadia Garavito. She sits in on the mental health court, the criminal mental health court calendar. And if there are people who, you know, she reaches out to those people who we don't petition on to see if they want voluntary services. And it is, some of them do, but unfortunately a lot of people, you know, because it would be voluntary, but just even to have like the social worker reaching out to them, just saying like, you know, these are the resources that we have, this is how we can help you. I think that has been beneficial. I think she's been doing this maybe for the last 3 or 4 years, reaching out for the those voluntary cases.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Are there other questions? Oh, yeah,
I had a
Cody.
question. Maybe this is outside your purview a bit, but I was wondering, is there information sharing between the courts and the central dispatch center to say that someone may have had like a mental incident, or, you know, maybe had some kind of court hold or something in the past, so that responding officers or even the correct people could, you know, if there is an alternative response, that they could be dispatched there? Or is that all done within the city?
So that is a good question. And I know just before COVID, one of my colleagues was actually going to meetings with law enforcement to kind of help develop this database, because no, law enforcement was not sharing information about, you know, kind of what was someone's past, you know, civil commitment versus, you know, they're on the street cops who are trying to arrest this person don't necessarily know about their mental health history. And so the BCA was creating a database that cops could utilize to be able to determine whether or not they've had mental health issues in the past. A lot of times when people do call the police when there is a mental health crisis, they mention that there's a mental health crisis going on. So that clues them in, but I'm not positive as to the if this database has been if they've continued to work on it. But yeah, that was a big gap, big hole in law enforcement's knowledge, that they just didn't know whether or not someone had been under civil commitment, was on you know, if they had a case manager even. So now I think there is a little bit of information out there, but they were trying to figure out exactly how they could share it. And it was with the BC, it is with the BCA now.
Great, thank you.
Are there other questions?
Okay, if people think about this for a while and questions pop up, after all, send them to me, and after I have figured out how I'm going to write this thing up. This is hard.
And you can always feel free to email me. My first name is Annsara, then it's .elasky@hennepin.us. I'm always available to answer any questions and happy to do so. One of the benefits of COVID that we are remote. I actually no longer live in Minnesota and won't be returning to live in Minnesota, but I continue to work in Hennepin County with my good colleague Sandra. And I am happy to continue to be with the office because it's been a great experience. And so I will be remote at least for the indefinite future, but yeah, I no longer live in Minnesota.
Well, like I said, if anybody else has a question, they just want to get popped in really quick so that it ends up in the write-up. I will forward it to you before I send the final. Well, there's never a final report. If somebody wants to add or whatever, that's always available.
Yes.
Thank you so very, very much.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. Have a good evening, everybody.
Okay. Just an interjection before you guys all pull out on me. Next month, Cornerstone has agreed to present to us. Cornerstone was founded in 1983. Believe it or not, Cody, 2 people recommended Cornerstone. Cornerstone's ultimate goal is to reduce the prevalence of domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, and general crime, because the whole thing is a big, nasty package. Their mission is to continue to create a continuum of service that helps create communities where individuals and families are safe and where children thrive. They do their thing to advocate social change. In 2020, 3,913 individuals were served. 5,790 adults and 52 children received 75, almost 78, 58 nights of safe housing and over 17,000 meals. Over 33,000 calls, texts, online chats, and other citizen outreach were placed to Cornerstone's center last year. And Cornerstone General Crime Services advocates provided support and resources to 570 people who experienced crimes against property and persons. Nearly 10,000 students participated in presentations on unhealthy relationships versus healthy, bullying, anger awareness, and harassment in schools. So they're starting with children and working their way up to adults, and they want us, we're going to hear more about it in September. That said, I don't think I botched up crime stats quite as badly this month, but yeah, I just checked the 7-day stats, and in 7 days in the 2nd precinct, we had 5 robberies, 6 aggravated assaults, and 2 domestic aggravated assaults. Our property crimes included 4 burglaries, 50 larcenies, 23 thefts from motor vehicles, and 9 auto thefts. However, the 2nd precinct still remains at producing about 11% of the crimes that occur in Minneapolis. So this is still the safest place to live. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way, but yeah. That said, Nick, have you got some news for us? Hello, Nicholas.
Yep. You pretty much covered it the last. I don't know if there's any specific questions. Out of the thefts, 12 of those, out of the 52 thefts of the previous, in the last week, 12 of those were catalytic converters, which we still continue to see a huge issue with those, especially the Toyota Priuses and the Mitsubishis. 11 bike thefts, and then the rest have been theft from motor vehicles. Again, talk to your neighbors. We can knock that number down dramatically if people would just take valuables out of your car. Just take everything out of your car. Don't leave gym bags, don't leave purses, don't leave laptops. And please, if you have a weapon, please do not leave it in the car. Do not leave it in the car. Please take it with you, take it in the house, secure it properly, but don't leave weapons in your car. Yeah, that's, I mean, I read your email about the robbery person over on the 2100 block, University Avenue Southeast. There was a robbery around midnight at 8/8. Around midnight, individuals filling up his car at the 24-hour pumps. 2 individuals tried to carjack and rob him. A fight ensued, and the victim was able to identify the suspects after police arrived. So we did make 2 arrests of males. Two males were arrested for that robbery of person. One of the robbery did not have a permanent address. The other one gave an address of just up the hill there on the 2500 block of Delaware Avenue Southeast. But yes, arrests were made in that one.
I'm very glad. I got the station on reserve.
Yep.
Celebrating also.
Yep, and the majority of the robberies that we had, the 5 robberies, 4 of them were in Southeast and 1 was in Northeast. We have the University of Minnesota will be starting school here. We'll actually have move-ins starting, move-outs actually starting this week and next week, and then move-ins starting the week of the 23rd. You know, and that's kind of when our precinct triples in size. You know, so far everything is a full go for the U of M. So we would be, you know, roughly having about, you know, 60 to 70,000 people a day walking around the U of M campus down in Dinkytown, down in that area. So Inspector Loaning is still continuing to try to seek funding for overtime shifts to cover for the robbery detail, and the U of M PD is also conducting robbery suppression detail in the Dinkytown area. Again, that's where we've seen a lot of the robberies happen in the last month. We've had 17 robberies in the last month, and a majority of those have been in Southeast. What we consider Marcy Homes East, which is the other side, the east side of 35E W. So yeah. So there we go with that. The problem with the suppression details too is now we're getting to the point where we're having a hard time filling those overtime slots. So slots are available, but we're having a hard time to get officers to sign up for those shifts. So that's kind of the part we're struggling with right now. It's just the shifts are available, but we're not having the officers sign up for those. The U of M has had, with their staffing, has had a little better luck in filling their positions. So the U of M PD has been working hard on those robbery suppression details down in Dinkytown. And ours are scheduled to go through Halloween. That's kind of traditionally when we've always had our robbery suppression details. And I think the U of M is going to about the same, if I remember correctly. They were going to go through, actually, I think they're going to go through October, I think September. They're going to go to the end of September with theirs, so.
Nick, I had a question. It seems, just looking at like dispatch and incident logs, that there's a lot of violence right around bar close in the Dinkytown area, especially near Blarney's and then around the corner there. I've seen other cities use, and I don't know if we have the staffing for this, but I've seen other cities use mechanisms in which they shut down those streets and not allow parking or any kind of vehicle traffic on those streets, and then put saturation patrols kind of there. Is that possible to do? Do we do that anywhere else in the city? Just to kind of, what seems to be happening there is there's just so, the cars driving by and then the cars parked there is making visibility very difficult.
Yep.
So even if you do have officers present, it's hard to see them, and then therefore there's no deterrent.
Yeah, no, they used those tactics before in downtown during a few years ago for that exact same reason. They closed off streets to limit traffic and to handle the bar close. We haven't done that in Dinkytown. Right now, there's not enough staffing to even come up with a small plan like that to block off street. We just don't have the staffing to put down there. And that's kind of, it's unfortunate, but that's where it's at right now, as we're to the point where the staffing levels, some nights, you might have 4 people on shift. You try to pull in some overtime officers if we could fill those shifts, just to cover the basic shift, not the specialized, not the shifts for the robbery suppression detail, but just the regular dog shift, mid shift, day shift. We have time slots for overtime to fill just to get us to minimums. And so we're having a hard time filling those. So yeah, right. When they used it downtown, it was effective. But again, we had a lot of bodies at that time to put down there. And right now we just don't have anybody to put down there. And that's kind of when we're seeing I think it was 2 weekends ago, where outside Blarney's, there was a shots fired call at closing. And we've seen similar incidents over by Burrito Local and kind of in that area too, with just the amount of crowds that are coming back. And then we'll see those numbers continue to increase here the next couple of weekends as people start to come back to campus. We expect to see those the numbers down there just to increase. And with McDonald's closed, I don't know what we're gonna do for cheap food down there. I don't know where else to go. Mesa Pizza, that might be the place to go now to back up, I think, since McDonald's is closed.
Yeah, it's a big hole in the ground there.
I have a question. This is Fran. I put it in the chat, and it's kind of a funny one, actually. Is there a date at which they aren't stealing the catalytic converters? Is my 2018 safe?
What kind of car?
Toyota Corolla.
Yeah, that should, yeah.
Too old, huh?
Yeah, well, no, it's there's like 10 converters that have the precious metals that they're looking for.
Oh. Okay.
In the converters, and like the Mitsubishi Highlanders, the Toyota Priuses, and there's like a handful of other cars that have. So it's a limited amount of vehicles that get targeted. I don't know if Rashid can chime in, because he's done a lot of crime alerts on this over the.
Can you publish this list, sir?
Huh?
Yeah, I was going to say
publish this list of desirable converters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned the Honda Elements, and then now we're seeing the Toyota Camrys that are hybrids, because they also have precious metals, and those cars are multiple years. So with our guest who has the Corolla, I think they're getting desperate enough now where they're even targeting cars that don't have too much precious metals, because the numbers that we're seeing doesn't indicate that they're being discriminate between cars that are like the Priuses and the Honda Elements. So if you do have a garage, I know it's summertime, everybody hates parking their car in the garage. I would recommend it, just to be on the safe side.
Thank you.
I want that list. All right, if we are finished, then it is pulling up to 7:30.
Just one note of positive. I know Nick was the bearer of bad news there. We did have about 36 events for National Night Out in the 2nd Precinct that we attended as a police department, and we doubled the numbers of just about every precinct in the city. So our numbers were very strong, even though this year isn't as comparable to previous years because we're still in a pandemic, and there was a handful of people who did not request MPD for their parties. But we did have a good night. We went out, talked to community members. We had a good time, and we had a good attendance from the 2nd Precinct despite the low numbers. We had Hennepin County Probation join us for that evening in a fancy van. I believe Holly brought 3 of her, if not 4, of her coworkers, including the former inspector of 3rd Precinct. So we had a good time that night. Just wanted to give you guys a little bit of positive in the craziness that's happened in the city.
That's very, very, very positive. Thank you, sir.
And I'll throw one more positive note out there. This will be my last 2-pack meeting. I want to thank everybody. I am leaving the MPD, 2nd Precinct. I want to thank everybody for 13 years of great partnerships. Cody, Emily, everybody, you guys have been tremendous. Mr. Meehan, great. Melissa, all you guys have been really helpful for me, helped me, good communication, loved working with you guys. At this time, my values and beliefs just currently do not align with the city of Minneapolis, and I just felt that I am at a crossroad right now. So I'm not going far, but actually been recruited by the U of M Police Department.
Oh.
So I will do more similar stuff with them, more community engagement though. with the U of M campus. So I won't be going too far. So I'll be still working with Rashid and Numdi and, you know, great partners over in the Marcy Holmes, Como area. So, but yeah, it's been a ride. I enjoyed my time here.
I will miss you very, very, very much on this venue, and I'm glad you are only moving across the street.
Yep.
I really am. For
From
me.
the basement to the second floor. So
Oh,
I'm
well,
moving up.
Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks for your service to the city and for the people of the second precinct. You've been just so wonderful, and I know you've just made such a difference. So thank you. And you're going to make a great difference in the University of Minnesota too. So looking forward to that.
Oh yeah, get to wear my maroon and gold.
I will tell you, I heard Nick's very first presentation on street safety 13 years ago.
Yep.
I'm old. And he takes these scripts and he polishes them and he adds to them and they just go from very good to wow off the top. And I'm happy that you're only moving across the street from me so that I'll be able to monitor your continuing progress.
And it may come back because for a while there, we did have representation from the U of M Police Department with Sergeant Nystrom attended our meetings when we were in person for a while there. So who knows?
Okay.
I want to say thank you from the St. Anthony East neighborhood. Nick has been awesome to work with here. We really appreciate you, Nick, and miss you, but good luck to you and good for you, man.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, on that note, I guess we will have to say adieu and good evening.
Have a good night.